bitter, smooth, maybe earthy.
Aromatic, rich and bitter.
Strong, bitter and nutty.
Coffee. Have you had 1, 2, maybe even 3 cups today? Have you walked past a cafe or coffee cart and craved that liquid gold stuff? It will be no understatement to say that globally, coffee is a beverage in high demand, and in fact, that demand is increasing annually. Being such a large and growing industry globally, the need to differentiate coffee based on sensory attributes could be considered paramount. And as such, the purpose of the study was to develop a living lexicon that describes the complete profile sensory attributes of a brewed coffee. The study used descriptive analysis, which is a sophisticated sensory technique that aims to generate a complete profile of sensory attributes for a product, such as coffee. It uses a highly trained panel, which is necessary for generating terms otherwise unthought of by an untrained panel. At the start, we asked people to name 3 attributes of coffee. Some found it difficult even to think of 3, and most of the terms thought of, such as bitterness, were similar and uncreative. Hence, the use of a highly trained panel would be crucial. Other sensory studies about coffee have been undertaken previously, which raises the question of why this one was done. Previous studies have often only used consumers or untrained panels, and even when trained panelists were used, either only a small list of sensory attributes were focused on, or a certain attributes in regards to specific cultural influences were the focus. The 2 coffee beans of economic importance are Arabica and Robusta. They differ in their flavour profiles, which tends to label Arabica as the higher quality of the 2 beans. Even Robusta's ease of growth and high caffeine content don't tend to beat out the sweeter, softer taste and higher acidity content of Arabica beans. In saying this, these 2 leading varieties don't simply divide the coffee industry in half. Differences in growing, processing and brewing conditions can lead to a great number of differences between any 2 beans of the same variety. Hence, any 2 brewed coffees from the same bean or otherwise could vary extensively, and due to the competitiveness of this industry, it's paramount to be able to distinguish and further to be able to convey these attributes to consumers. Note that in sensory science, a lexicon is a list of words used to describe the sensory attributes of a food product. In this case, it will be describing the flavour, aroma and aftertaste of coffee. It's said to be living, which means that although a final list of terms would be generated from the study, those terms will be modifiable. This is to make sure that the lexicon remains appropriate and specific for any future studies, and is also to ensure that as coffee evolves, and with any product in high demand, it will, so too with this lexicon.
So there were 3 key processes involved in the development of this living lexicon. First of which was developing 4 sets of variables, which demonstrates the wide range of coffees available on a global scale. This was then followed by training of panel, which was extensive, and helped to develop intricate terms needed to constitute this vast living lexicon. There were also various preparation methods used to produce the most diverse range of sensory attributes for each coffee sample. And this all led to the production of a living lexicon, which can be adapted for purposes of future studies of the sensory properties of coffee. So the purpose of using 4 sets in this study is to extract as wide a range possible of lexicon terms that are applicable to the majority of coffee samples worldwide. For example, coffees of specific origins, such as those found in Colombia, are likely to have vastly different sensory profiles to those available at your local supermarket, therefore providing both a broad and specific analysis of the possible sensory attributes that constitute our favourite hot beverage. The panel consisted of 5 highly trained members from the Sensory Analysis Centre in America, who had extensive prior experience in the field of sensory testing. This is important for the purposes of this study, as its main objective was to generate as wide a range of lexicon possible. They required 50 hours of specialist training in order to tease out these less obvious sensory attributes, such as petroleum-like aromas, that a normal consumer wouldn't necessarily describe coffee by. This point is illustrated very clearly in the interviews we conducted at the beginning of this presentation, where the terms people generated tended to be less complex and of a much narrower range. The way in which we prepare coffee varies extensively. For example, filter plunging, instant coffee, and even Nespresso, all of which have different sensory attributes according to the method by which they are prepared. These preparation processes for the coffee samples tested in the study was conducted in an orderly manner as to maximize the sensory attributes across each of the different samples, therefore producing a more meaningful comparison between the samples tested and developing a wider range of lexicon available for future reference. The main objective of following this sensory testing procedure was to develop this extensive living lexicon, which consists of 110 different attributes that can be used to describe coffee. The living term refers to the fact that this lexicon can be changed, altered, and adapted for its use in future studies that endeavour to further refine the sensory profile of coffee. This adaptation can be conducted via two separate methods, either selecting a smaller list of applicable attributes using a ballot system, or screening the samples that are to be included in the future study, and then select from the living lexicon all the attributes which would best help distinguish the samples at hand.
Nutty, bitter, sweet and fruity are just some of the words used to describe coffee through the development of a living coffee lexicon. This section outlines the presentation and discussion of results in terms of lexicon development for the coffee samples. You may struggle to come up with even 5 words to describe coffee. However, the trained panel in this study managed to come up with a staggering 110 attributes to describe coffee with. Through use of descriptive analysis, the trained panel managed to develop a sensory profile of coffee samples using 110 attributes and references. This involved qualitative aspects such as identifying sensory attributes and a quantitative aspect in regards to the intensity of each attribute. Principal components analysis was used to effectively visualize the results of the coffee lexicon and differentiate coffee samples based on variables. This is an example of attributes generated for the coffee lexicon and the associated definition and reference made by the panel. Tables like this were effectively used to reflect the large number of attributes generated through the developmental process. The study outlined the complexity of coffee samples by using both individual attributes and layered attributes to describe certain attributes such as fruity. This is an example of principal components analysis that was carried out to interpret the results. The loading plot displays groupings that were made based on related variables. Principal components analysis was used to decrease the number of descriptors for the coffee samples by reducing related variables into a single factor. This form of data reduction allowed relationships to be made between variables such as aroma, flavour, and aftertaste. This tree diagram visually shows the levels of complexity of the lexicon. From this, we can visually see characteristics that were found in the coffee samples. This clearly shows the complexity of the coffee lexicon, as words that correlate to the attribute branch off, such as burnt branching off from roasted notes. This outlines various relationships between sensory attributes that the lexicon contains. The concept of a living lexicon is reinforced in the results and discussion. New attributes were constantly being added to the lexicon at each phase of development in order to make improvements. The study conveys the importance of lexicons being living, as they need to be able to change over time to keep up with product development. Coffee, like many things, changes all the time in terms of flavour and other aspects. Therefore, it is necessary to have a lexicon that can adapt to these changes to keep up with the coffee market.
The purpose of the study was achieved and a living lexicon for coffee was produced, which consists of 110 attributes which can be used for various applications within descriptive sensory evaluation of coffee. So different sensory science techniques were used throughout the study to contribute to a finely tuned lexicon. Some of these included adequate panel selection and training so that the terms that were generated were comprehensive and specific. This also included conducting a descriptive analysis using the generated lexicon, and this validated it and confirmed that it was suitable for use in sensory evaluation. The key factors in the previous table ultimately allowed for the generation of a finely tuned sensory tool, and this tool includes descriptors covering all aromas, flavours and aftertaste related to coffee, as well as definitions, references and intensities. So the lexicon is termed as living, which means that it can be adapted and refined as needed, which includes refining the lexicon into a sublexicon depending on the attributes of interest for a particular application. And it can also be added to when new descriptors arise, such as in future coffee analysis. So basically, the living lexicon can account for changes in coffee as the beverage evolves. As the title of the article suggests, the lexicon can be applied to different aspects within the descriptive sensory evaluation of coffee. This includes descriptive analysis techniques, for example, the spectrum profile method, which specifically sees the use of terms taken from a pre-existing lexicon, such as the one generated in this study. Through these descriptive analysis techniques, the lexicon can contribute to the production of a complete sensory profile for a particular coffee product. So this sensory profile can then be used for applications which include things relating to quality control, product development, and also comparison to competitor products. And these all contribute to the development of high quality coffee products. So this flowchart basically summarizes and shows that the lexicon can contribute to the production of high quality coffee products, and this ultimately leads to increased consumer satisfaction and demand, which further contributes to growth of the coffee industry.